Good evening, live from New Delhi. You're watching DD India Live, India's voice to the world. I'm Shubhendu Ghosh, coming up in the next 30 minutes. UK Supreme Court rules legal definition of a woman is based on biological sex, says law still gives protection against discrimination to transgender people. US President Donald Trump orders tariff probe on all US critical minerals imports amid national security concerns. Electronic goods, semiconductors, smartphone imports to bear the brunt. India rejects attempts to introduce new parameters including religion and faith as the basis of representation in reformed UN Security Council. And after years of negotiations, WHO countries strike landmark agreement on tackling future pandemics. UK's Supreme Court has ruled that legal definition of a woman is based on biological sex. The UK court on Wednesday upheld an appeal by a campaign group on whether transgender women are legally women under equality legislation, ruling that the law referred to a biological woman and biological sex. In a win for the Scottish gender-critical campaigners who brought the case to the UK's highest court, 5 London judges unanimously ruled the terms woman and sex in the Equality Act 2010 refers to biological woman and biological sex. The court added the act also protected transgender people against discrimination.
The terms woman and sex in the Equality Act 2010 refer to a biological woman and biological sex. But we counsel against reading this judgment as a triumph of one or more groups in our society at the expense of another. It is not.
US President Donald Trump has ordered a probe on Tuesday that may result in tariffs on critical minerals, rare earth metals and associated products such as smartphones in an escalation of his dispute with global trade partners. The order states critical minerals and their derivatives are essential for US military and energy infrastructure, noting that their use in jet engines, missile guidance systems and advanced computing, among others. Donald Trump has upended markets in recent weeks with his sweeping on-off levies, and this investigation could see him impose further tariffs if it shows that imports of critical minerals and their derivatives endanger American national security. The imports targeted include so-called critical minerals like cobalt, lithium, nickel, rare earth elements such as products that partly require these resources, such as electric vehicles and batteries. Meanwhile, US President Trump confirmed on Truth Social platform that he will be holding talks over tariffs with Japan envoy on Wednesday. Many other nations will also hold talks with the United States. China tells Trump to stop threatening and blackmailing as the country appointed its new international trade negotiator. Here's more.
US President Donald Trump's tariffs have got the nations scrambling to seek alternative strategies to offset the headwinds surging towards their respective economies. Global leaders are crisscrossing continents to further strengthen trade relations and forge new partnerships. China's President Xi Jinping is in Malaysia as part of his tour of Southeast Asia to further consolidate economic and trading ties with traditional trade allies. Earlier, China and Vietnam signed 45 cooperation agreements on, among other things, supply chains and artificial intelligence. Simultaneously, China is preparing for what could be challenging times ahead. On Wednesday, China appointed a new trade negotiator, Li Chenggan, who will be key in any talks over tariffs with the United States. President Trump has said that China's efforts to ramp up trade pacts with Asian economies were aimed to corner the United States. Even US allies, which have relied heavily on exports to Washington, are now keen to probe possibilities of new alliances. South Korea and Vietnam have agreed to raise their bilateral trade to $150 billion by 2030. Allies are also making a dash to Washington to seek a favorable trade deal with the United States. South Korea's Finance Minister Choi Sang-mok will meet his US counterpart Scott Bessent next week with an aim to delay imposition of reciprocal tariffs as much as possible. Tokyo's envoy has also left for Washington. He said that they are confident of a win-win outcome while protecting Japanese national interests. Spanish Economy Minister Carlos Cuerpo said that he was convinced that the United States and the European Union would negotiate a fair trade deal after meeting with US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. Indonesian officials are also coming to Washington. They are expected to propose an increase in crude oil and liquefied petroleum gas imports from the United States by around $10 billion as part of its tariffs negotiations. Ayushi Bhatnagar's report, DD India.
The US and China are in an all-out trade war after US President Trump raised import tariffs on Chinese goods. That country retaliated, things escalated fast, and now many experts fear this trade spat will cause problems in other regions as well, including the European Union. Lars Holter is with DW, joins me from Berlin. Lars, what exactly is Europe worried about?
Thanks for having me. Well, the problem is that China is producing a lot and a lot of everything, whether that's steel, electric vehicles, plastic toys, household appliances, or even electronics. China is a massive manufacturing nation, and thanks to generous government subsidies that are actually playing into this whole trade war scenario anyway, they're producing all of this pretty cheap, at least cheaper than, say, US companies or European companies for that matter. Now, much of what China produces was destined for the US market, but with higher tariffs, making exporting to the US or even selling within the US at inflated prices a lot more difficult. Many worry that a lot of the goods will now be shipped to the EU to be sold on the market here. And that influx of obviously massive amounts of goods at cheap prices would be a real threat to EU producers. It's pretty clear that the EU cannot absorb the trade that is now not happening with the US. So leaders in Brussels are trying to figure out how to engage China to not destabilize markets.
And what ideas have Europe come up with? Are there any solutions to this problem?
No, this is all just beginning. If we are really dealing with a multi-billion euro trade problem, it will obviously take some time. But EU chief Ursula von der Leyen has said she will actively and constructively engage China. And she said, and I quote, "We cannot absorb global overcapacity, nor will we accept dumping on our market." So the EU is currently in talks with Beijing about minimum prices, something that has already happened last week with regards to cars. What's happening exactly here is the EU will not impose higher import tariffs on Chinese-made cars, but the Chinese automakers agree to not sell at the artificially low prices that only they can offer to consumers. Thanks to those subsidies I mentioned, but also due to the general environment, of course, they're operating in. They have lower wages and in some other ways, generally lower production costs. Now, some might ask, why did the EU not go straight to tariffs? Obviously, that's because the EU automakers were afraid that this could be exactly the kind of escalation that would lead to counter tariffs, and that would be a further disadvantage to them.
And amidst these developments, what is the EU's trade relationship with China like these days?
It's complicated. Looking at the numbers, the EU has a trade deficit of almost 300 billion euros with China, but that doesn't begin to tell the story. There were always two really essential problems in Chinese-EU relations over the past years. One was these government subsidies, of course, that are against WTO rules. European officials have for years demanded concessions from China, including voluntary restraints on the shipment of cheap goods and minimum prices to offset those subsidies. And then the other problem is that there's never been a level playing field. Chinese companies have always invested in German or European companies, but German companies have long been kept out of the Chinese markets or been allowed there only under very strict settings. Generally, Europe is seeing China as a systemic rival. China, meanwhile, says that it sees Europe as an increasingly close trading partner. Now, it will be interesting how this will all play out with Trump and the US upending trade as we have known it for so long.
Lars, thank you for joining us with those updates. Moving on, US President Trump has threatened to strip Harvard University of its tax-exempt status as the feud with the college escalates. The action comes after President already moved to freeze some $2.2 billion of federal funding to Harvard over its refusal to agree to demands which include how the university selects students. DD India's Harshita Oberoi gets us more.
The Trump administration has issued a stark ultimatum. Harvard must fall in line or risk losing its protected tax status. Trump posted on social media that Harvard should lose its tax-exempt status and be taxed as a political entity if it does not submit to the demands for the university to change the way it runs itself, including selection of students and authority for professors.
First, when it comes to Harvard, as I said, the president has been quite clear they must follow federal law. He also wants to see Harvard apologize, and Harvard should apologize for the egregious anti-Semitism that took place on their college campus against Jewish American students.
The government froze more than $2 billion in federal research contracts and grants after President Alan Garber vowed to protect constitutional rights, declaring the university will not be taken over. Harvard has enlisted law firms, including Queen Emanuel, to defend its autonomy. The pressure campaign echoes a similar clash with Columbia University. After protests on campus, the administration cut $400 million in funding. Dozens of universities are separately battling the Trump administration in court over broad research funding cuts that have led to staff layoffs. Meanwhile, 3 law students have filed a lawsuit against the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, challenging its investigation into diversity, equity, and inclusion policies at 20 major US law firms. They claim the agency is unlawfully collecting personal data, weaponizing it under political orders. Harshita Oberoi's report for DD India.
In other news, India has rejected the attempts to introduce new parameters, including religion and faith, as the basis of representation in a reformed UN Security Council. New Delhi asserted that the latest attempts to include new criteria stand opposed to the accepted basis of regional representation. Participating in the intergovernmental negotiations meeting on size of the future council and cluster discussion on regional representation, India's permanent representative to the UN, Ambassador P. Harish, said those opposed to text-based negotiations do not seek progress on UNSC reforms.
First, those opposed to text-based negotiations do not seek progress on reforms. Second, an argument that an expanded and reformed Security Council would not be efficient is an attempt to stall real reforms. A reformed council with appropriate working methods and accountability mechanisms would be equipped to function effectively and deliver meaningfully on pressing global issues. Third, a consolidated model that does not cover expansion in both the permanent and non-permanent categories would not achieve the purpose of reform, further entrenching the status quo. And finally, attempts to introduce new parameters such as religion and faith as basis for representation in a reformed council runs completely counter to regional representation, which has been the accepted basis for representation in the United Nations.
Canada is preparing for the elections in full swing, where main party leaders Mark Carney and Pierre Poilievre face off in a fiery debate on Wednesday. The debate could prove pivotal ahead of the month's election, where Prime Minister Mark Carney's French language skills set to be tested. In a departure from the past Canadian elections, polls indicate this year's race is largely becoming a two-party contest, raising the debate stakes for both Carney and Poilievre. Both candidates have strong hold on current economic conditions of the country and are significantly addressing the tariff situations with the neighbor United States. Israeli troops will remain in the buffer zones that they have created in Gaza even after any settlement to end the war. Defense Minister Israel Katz has said his efforts to revive a ceasefire agreement faltered. Since resuming their operation last month, Israeli forces have carved out a broad security zone extending deep into Gaza and squeezing more than 2 million Palestinians into ever smaller areas in the south and along the coastline. In southern Gaza alone, Israeli forces have seized about 20% of the enclave's territory, taking control of the border city of Rafah and pushing inland up to the so-called Morag corridor that runs from eastern edge of Gaza to the Mediterranean Sea between Rafah and the city of Khan Yunis. Israel says its forces have killed hundreds of Hamas fighters, including many senior commanders of the group, but the operation has alarmed the United Nations and European countries. Meanwhile, Israel on Wednesday said it would keep blocking humanitarian aid from entering Gaza. Still to come on this edition of DD India Live. Iran's right to enrich uranium is not negotiable, says Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi. India's cumulative exports in merchandise services during financial year 24-25 estimated to grow by over 5%. And Real Madrid face daunting task of overcoming deficit when they host Arsenal in UEFA Champions League quarter-finals, second leg.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi's landmark Sri Lanka visit. From defence cooperation to energy and digital connectivity. Many firsts enhancing bilateral ties. Buddhism and Ramayana. Cultural and historical links re-energized. Watch India-Sri Lanka Exemplary Neighbours tonight at 8:30 PM IST and 3 PM GMT. Only on DD India.
Welcome back. You're watching DD India Live. I'm Shubhendu Ghosh. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has said on Wednesday that Iran's right to enrich uranium is not negotiable. Iran's Foreign Minister, who will visit Russia on Thursday, made these comments ahead of second round of talks in Oman this weekend with the United States.
What is certain is that Iran's enrichment is a real, accepted and factual matter, and we are prepared to build confidence regarding potential concerns, but the principle of enrichment is non-negotiable.
Earlier, US envoy Steve Witkoff had said that a diplomatic agreement with Iran will depend on working out details around verification of the country's uranium enrichment and weapons programs.
The president means what he says, which is they cannot have a bomb. The conversation with the Iranians will be much about two critical points. One, enrichment. As you mentioned, they do not need to enrich past 3.67%. In some circumstances, they're at 60%. In other circumstances, 20%. That cannot be. And you do not need to run, as they claim, a civil nuclear program where you're enriching past 3.67%.
And the Kremlin on Wednesday declined to specify when the 30-day moratorium on strikes on Ukraine's energy infrastructure would end, or whether it would be extended. This was just hours before the agreement was set to expire. Ukrainian Air Force launched 97 drones during overnight attacks. The Air Force said it shot down 57 drones, with another 34 not reaching their targets, likely due to electronic warfare countermeasures. Ukrainian officials say Russia's drone attack on the Black Sea port city of Odessa damaged residential buildings, warehouses, civilian infrastructure. Meanwhile, Ukraine's parliament has extended the martial law until August this year, delaying the timing of new elections that the United States and Russia have been pushing for. In other news, Prime Minister Narendra Modi spoke to Finland's President Alexander Stubb. In a post on X, Prime Minister says, and I quote, had a fruitful conversation with President Alexander Stubb. PM added that Finland is an important partner country in the EU and India is committed to elevate its ties with the bloc. Both leaders exchanged their perspectives on regional and global issues, including the situation in Ukraine. After more than 3 years of negotiations and a final overnight push, countries at the World Health Organization (WHO) have agreed on a historic pandemic accord aimed at avoiding a repeat of the mistakes committed during COVID crisis. Adopted on Wednesday, the 32-page agreement outlines global cooperation and pandemic preparedness, prevention and response. It marks the first major international health accord since the pandemic began some 5 years ago. The agreement comes amid growing threats like H5N1, bird flu, measles, mpox. While the US did not participate in the talks, their absence loomed large, especially amid concerns over tariffs on medical goods.
Marks a significant milestone in our shared journey toward a safer world. We celebrate the successful conclusion of negotiations on a draft pandemic agreement, completed in just 3.5 years.
India's exports have turned positive in about 4 months. The cumulative exports of merchandise and services during financial year 2024-25 is estimated to grow by 5.5% at $820.93 billion as compared to $778.13 billion in the last fiscal. The cumulative value of merchandise exports during financial year 24-25, April to March, was $437.42 billion, registering a positive growth of about 0.08% as compared to $437.07 billion during financial year 23-24, April to March. India witnessed the highest ever export of non-petroleum merchandise during the fiscal year ending March 2025. With an increase of 6% in financial year 24-25, the exports were valued at $374.08 billion as compared to $352.92 billion in 23-24. Major drivers of merchandise exports growth in the financial year 24-25 include coffee, tobacco, electronic goods, rice, jute, manufactured and several other commodities. Coffee exports, for example, rose by over 40% from US $1.29 billion in 23-24 to $1.81 billion in the financial year 24-25. The Indian Army is full of stories of valor and heroism, but this is the story of the most decorated soldier, Naib Subedar Chunilal. He won 3 out of 4 top military honours, laid down his life for the nation. The awe-inspiring story of Naib Chunilal has been penned by a retired general of the Indian Army and released in Delhi by Chief of Defence Staff General Anil Chauhan. The family of the martyred soldier was also present on the occasion. DD India correspondent Prasar Bharati brings us more.
Bravest of the brave, this is the story of a soldier who at the young age of 19 got an gallantry award, and this was not the first one. He went on to achieve 3 out of 4 highest gallantry awards from the Indian Army. And I have with me General S.K. Dua, who wrote this fine book.
I am talking about the situation when Chunilal was a Havaldar. And as you rightly brought out, he was already a Sena medal as a young rookie soldier when he was just 19 years old. So a decade later, he was an experienced Havaldar and a section commander when I was the commanding officer. And that time I found we were on the LOC, we used to have a lot of encounter with terrorists in 1998, 99, 2000. And when Chunni was present in an encounter, I would be assured.
Colonel Sean, today the book is out in the public and we all heard that inspiring story, rather stories of inspiration. So what is your memory of Naib Subedar Chunilal, especially of his supreme sacrifice?
He was an inspiration right from the time we joined. I joined in 94. In that time he was already a Sena medal from Siachen days. And he has been with us in almost every, whether it was games, whether it was in operations, whether it was even in training, Chunilal was always there in some way or the other.
So there you heard from the officers, from the commanding officer. He was a man with a mission and mission to serve his country with utmost sacrifice. With cameraman Uttam in Delhi, this is Vishal Baristo for DD India.
Let's now turn to other stories making news today. Chief Justice Sanjeev Khanna has recommended Justice Bhushan Ramakrishna Gavai as his successor. Justice Gavai will become the 52nd Chief Justice on May 14th, with President Draupadi Murmu administering the oath following Khanna's retirement on May 13th. Delhi's Indira Gandhi International Airport has been ranked the 9th busiest in the world for 2024, handling over 77 million passengers. That's 7.8% jump from last year and a 13.6% rise since 2019, highlighting strong post-pandemic growth. In a first for Indian Railways, an ATM has been installed on a trial basis aboard the Madmad CSMT Panchvati Express in Maharashtra, part of the Railway Board's ATM on Wheels initiative to boost non-fare revenue. Let's turn to sports. Delhi Capitals will face Rajasthan Royals in match 32 of the Indian Premier League 2025 at Arun Jaitley Stadium in Delhi on Wednesday. Rajasthan are coming after getting a 9-wicket thrashing at the hands of Royal Challengers Bengaluru in Jaipur. A major issue of RR has been their batting hasn't clicked as a unit, and lack of batting depth in their side isn't helping their cause either. Delhi, on the other hand, started the season with 4 consecutive wins before suffering their first defeat against Mumbai Indians in their last fixture. Despite the loss, the performance by their impact player Karun Nair, shining brightly with breathtaking 40-ball 89 in his first game of the tournament, was a big positive for the team. In soccer, Real Madrid host Arsenal in the UEFA Champions League quarter-finals second leg on Wednesday. Madrid would attempt to put on yet another special night and overturn a sizable deficit. Arsenal midfielder Declan Rice scored 2 fantastic free kicks as the Premier League club secured a 3-0 victory over holders Real in the first leg of the Emirates Stadium last week to put one foot in the semi-finals. However, Real, record 15 times European champions, have won 6 Champions League titles since 2009 and have made a habit of completing unlikely recoveries in the knockout stages of the competitions. The Spanish heavyweights have overturned deficits against Paris Saint-Germain, Manchester City and VfL Wolfsburg in the recent years, with all these 3 of those comebacks being staged in the iconic Bernabeu Stadium. And that's all in this edition of DD India Live. Let us know your thoughts on the news of the day. For those on the go, you can get all the latest news and updates from India and across the world on DD India mobile app. The app is available on both Android and iOS. Scan the QR code, download now. And we'll be back with more news as it breaks here on DD India. I'm Shubhendu Ghosh from all of us here in Delhi. Thanks for watching DD India Live. Namaskar.